thinking in a foreign language, and you know that I have a course on that, and everybody who is taking the advanced listening fluency course, the writing fluency course, everyone who's doing my reading exercises, and everyone who's focusing on public speaking with me, you know that I always talk about kind of switching gears, right? You have to learn to think in a foreign language. And the first thing that you need to do in order to start thinking in a foreign language, you got to stop translating every word in your head. When I checked your applications for the writing courses, every second person writes the same thing. Every second person tells me that I want to learn to communicate differently, because what happens right now is that I translate every single word in my head and I reply to a person who is asking a question with a few minutes delay, and it's not working, especially if I'm in the middle of a conference call with my foreign clients, or especially if I'm suddenly introduced to a person who speaks a weird accent, a very unusual accent to me, so I need a while to get used to their accent. And at the same time, everybody wants to learn to think in a different language, which is, to many people, that translates to being able to switch from one language to another one, just like that. And pretty much this is it. So when I speak English, or when I speak German, or when I speak Russian, for me it takes seconds to switch from one language to another. And I think it happens because I don't translate. I immediately start thinking in a different language. And when somebody asks me a question, I respond in the language that, the question was asked. So it's really, really hard. It's not easy if you want to stop translating, but you don't know how to do it, right? The problem with translating is, first of all, it takes a lot of time, and you're focused on yourself while you're translating, and you're completely missing out of what's going on in front of you, or what the person is trying to communicate. You can miss that completely because you're so focused on the form of what you're saying, and you might be standing there and trying to remember a word, and you might stumble upon a word. So this is why it's not really working in business communications, and it's not really working when you try to build solid relationships with people. And another problem with translating is that you see an English word, then you find an alternative to this English word in your first language. You have one definition of this word. Let's say, I don't know, let's take the word reconnaissance, which is a difficult word, reconnaissance. And then you translated it, and I bet there is we don't have a word like that in Russian. You would need a sentence to translate that. And by the way, if you're watching this video, try to write the word that I said. So let's check your listening skills. If you heard what I said, write down the word. But at least, let's imagine you found this word in Russian and now you think you understand what the person meant when they said that English word. And this is the problem with translating. We assume that we understand if we have translated the word. And very often that's not the case. When you have the translation in front of you, it's just an assumption that you really truly understand what the person meant when they said their message in English or in any other foreign language. Because we rely only on words. And the meaning of what's being communicated is more than just words. It's the word, it's the context, it's the intonation, it's the situation you're in, it's the person who is communicating that message. And very often words have a lot of meanings. So if you have found one alternative to one word, right? You have found the translation. It doesn't mean that the meaning that you have found is exactly what the word means. For example, when people start the writing course, they usually have to unlearn to use Google Translate. And if you go to Google Translate, and you type in the word that you don't know in the English language, or the word that you want to know, it will give you only one word in Russian. Only one. Even if the word you're trying to learn has 100 of other different meanings. And this is, and then you kind of you assume that once you see this alternative on Google Translate, now you know the word. But Google Translate doesn't know your context. It doesn't know your situation. It doesn't know what's going on. And on the contrary, if you use a Russian English dictionary like Multitran, for example, people often get overwhelmed because they type in a word and they see 135 entries. This is how many meanings one word can have, which one do you pick? Which one is correct? And people get overwhelmed, and this is why they resort to Google Translate one more time. And they assume that if they see the translation, they understand what the word really means. But the word never means anything on its own, out of context. You need to see the word in the context. You need to hear it coming from the mouth of a native speaker or a person who is trying to communicate with you. And you need to be able to read it yourself. You need to be able to pronounce it yourself. And you need to be able to make sure that this meaning is the meaning that's being communicated. This is why translation, it's the last resort, I would say. It will help if you, let's say, if you're doing some medical research, right? Or if you have a lot of professional jargon, I don't know, maybe scientific vocabulary, something that you really need to translate from one language to another because there is only one special term like that, then yeah, okay, maybe translation will help to understand what's going on. But when you simply communicate, it's not helping because people always use words out of context. So the first thing that you need to unlearn if you really want to develop the skill of thinking in a foreign language, it's to stop translating. I have a bunch of videos, I think, on how to use English dictionaries, but I would like to remind you one more time that, like, if you really want to do this, one simple thing you can start doing today is just ditch Google Translate. Stop using it. When you start learning from English dictionaries, your listening skills will also improve because an English dictionary will always have this magic button where you can click on it and listen to the way the word needs to be pronounced, has to be pronounced. You can listen to the correct pronunciation of this word, and you can choose between American version of it and British version of it. People think they heard something, they're not sure, and very often people will not even stop and ask, like, what was that word? What did you say? I'm sorry, I'm not sure I quite got it. It's also kind of, I think, in our culture that it's not okay to show that you didn't understand something. It's not okay because people might assume you're stupid or you're uneducated or you're not as educated as they think you are. And that's one of the reasons why a lot of Russian speakers, let's say, they wouldn't stop in a conversation and they would not ask for clarifications if they didn't understand something. Like, what was that? Can you say it again? And the second reason that I also see a lot is that why people don't stop and don't ask for clarifications is that they truly don't understand that they missed something. Like, they cannot identify this new piece of information in the free flow of speech. To them, like, they're trying to understand the main message, like to figure out what's going on the surface, but they can't really identify that. You know, like, to me, it's very obvious if I understand all the words and then I again understand all the words. So this part that I couldn't get, which sounded like just a bunch of noise, I can clearly understand that. And I can go back to that and I can say, what was that word in the middle? J what? J, like, at least I can hear the letters, but I might not know the word. But I can ask a person to go back to this word and clarify it for me because that might be a key word, or I'm just curious what I might have missed. And a lot of people genuinely do not hear that because they're used to trying to grasp the main idea of what's going on, but the result of it is what we see a lot. People guess a lot. People do a lot of guessing in communication, and when they cannot identify the new information in the free flow of speech, well, it's hard. It's hard because when they try to answer the questions, or when they try to deliver the message that they have just heard to a colleague or to their boss or simply to another person, very often they don't communicate the message that they have received, but they communicate their interpretation of the message that they have received. And their interpretation depends on how much they can hear. We're going to go into this in a second, but it's very interesting to learn, and I mean, for me especially, to research how people hear and how they understand. And as long as these mechanisms are very active in your brain, it's really going to be very hard to learn to think in a foreign language, because translating means you're trying to control everything that's going on. When you translate every word, or I bet you can recognize yourself in this situation, when you translate every single word that you're reading, let's say, or when you're watching a movie, or when you're talking to a person and you're trying to translate every word that they're saying, and then once you're stuck upon one word, you stop listening because you're trying to figure out what that word means. Or maybe this word rings a bell and you think like, oh my god, I know this word, I've seen it before, I've heard it before, what does it mean exactly? And you stop, and kind of communication stops too, because you're hanging on that word that might be important, might be not, but you're missing the rest of the message, and the train leaves without you. This is control, and as long as you're trying to control the language or your own perception of the language, it's not going to help. Learning to think in a different language requires a lot of attentiveness, not control, but attentiveness. When you're trying to control something, you're trying to fit all pieces of new information into what you can expect. Like you have your own box of what English is like, and everything should fit into this box, like what English can sound, what words might mean. And you're trying, like when we control things, we're trying to make sure that there is a place for all the new information we're receiving in a foreign language in this box that we have created in our minds for ourselves. And it's a useless and it's a pointless game, because it's not working, and language doesn't work like this, and people don't work like this. Being attentive means a completely different thing. It doesn't mean trying to control what's going on. It doesn't mean trying to control your own perception of what people are telling you. Being attentive to yourself in the first place, and being attentive to what other people are communicating to you, actually, it's not controlling what you're saying, and it's not controlling what other people are saying, and it's not about controlling what they might mean or what you might receive. It's simply being able to identify what's going on. Let's say if you listen to a sentence and you hear a piece of new information in the middle of the sentence, you are able to identify it, and you're able to come back to it, right? Or if you hear a sentence very clearly and you're being attentive, you're able to write it down exactly as you hear it. That means you're being attentive. If you meet a new person with a new accent to you, right? And if you're being attentive, you can hear how the same words sound very differently when you say those words and when this person says these words.
I was chatting to this woman downtown the other day. She came up to me and she wanted me to see something. I don't know what though. She was like, oh my God, look over there. I said, look over what? She's like, over there. Look at that her. And I said, her? She's like, no, her. There's two of them.
And when you are attentive, to me, it means you hear every detail. You really hear every word. And when you look at the sentence, if you're being attentive, you see the logical connections between the sentences. And you don't jump to conclusions right away, and you don't try to expect what this text might communicate, because you think, you think you've seen these emails a lot and they all mean the same thing. No, you really carefully look at it, and you're very attentive, and you can see that every message is pretty much different, is very different. And if you're attentive, you can read not only the words, but you also read what's between the words. If you're attentive, you can hear if people are upset, if people are surprised, if people don't want to continue the conversation, if people want to start a conversation with you. You can pick up on a lot of things that are between the words. That's essential if you do business in the English language. That's essential if you deliver presentations in your second language, because if you can't feel what's going on, that means you're being attentive to yourself, to other people, and to the environment, to everything that's happening around you. It's important to cultivate attentiveness if your goal is to learn to think in a foreign language, because thinking in a foreign language doesn't mean just being able to speak freely, as people say in their applications when they apply for my writing courses. They say, I want to be free, I want to be fluent. And they forget that fluency is not just speaking, right? Many people think that if I'm fluent, then I'm able to speak fluently. But fluency actually includes speaking fluency, listening fluency, writing fluency, and reading fluency. So if you're looking at a text in English, if your reading skills are fluent, then you're able to understand exactly what this text communicates. Again, not your interpretation of what this text might mean. And if you're really fluent, you can look at this text and you can communicate the gist of the message, exactly the message that's in the text, to a person sitting next to you with your voice. Not your interpretation, but really the message of the text. If you're fluent and your listening skills, are pretty advanced, then you can hear every word that people are telling you, and you can very easily identify new words. You can hear accents, and you can notice that some people mean completely different things when they say the words that you thought you knew, right? This is how you learn dialects. Or, for example, here I learned the word hapa, which I heard very clearly, but I learned that this is someone who is half Caucasian and half Asian, and they'll call them hapa. And if you have worked on your writing fluency, then your writing skills show that. That means you can communicate the message, let's say, that you have just read in an email from a colleague, or a message that you have, or the news that you have just learned in a conference call, right, or on a phone call with a client. You can put it in writing, and you can send an email that will clearly communicate what's going on, and you will not need to spend an hour on your email trying to figure out if everything you have written is correct, if your grammar is correct, if your spelling is good, if your message is clear. You simply write it down, and you know exactly that what you have written down makes sense. Fluency, especially native-like fluency, is not just speaking, and more, I would say it's impossible to develop speaking fluency without being able to write, to hear, to speak, and to read. This is why in all the courses that I offer, we focus on all the skills, especially the listening course. The first task in the listening course is a reading task. It's not about listening to pre-recorded messages adapted by native speakers for non-native speakers. We only work with materials that were produced by native speakers. And the first task is reading, because reading aloud is the most powerful exercise to develop your speaking fluency and to learn to start thinking in a foreign language. This week, and I believe the task was already published today, this week and this Friday, we're learning to read fiction books, because learning to think in a foreign language and develop this kind of fluency, native-like fluency, means understanding the culture. It means not learning language as a discipline, as a set of grammar rules and a certain amount of words that you need to memorize or you need to understand, but it's about learning what's behind the words. What do really people mean by those words? What's the culture? And you can learn the culture through art, right? By being among these people, by learning from the people. But literature is amazing, because once you hear how authors read their own creations, you can learn so much about the intonation, about the emotions, about how emotions are being communicated in a foreign language. And I developed a new algorithm of how we we will work with fiction books, poems, novels, stories. There's a whole bunch, and it's coming. We're just starting this week. But you have to do it aloud. So if you practice reading to yourself and you never open your mouth when you read, you're not practicing. You're simply learning to understand the translation of what's being read. Because let's be honest, when non-native speakers read a piece of email, and this is what happens even to advanced students, when you look at a text in the English language, most people will immediately, they will scan it, they will understand the meaning of the text, and they immediately translate it and put it here in Russian, in their first language. So you understand what the text is about? If someone asks you, what is this text about? Your first call will be to say it in Russian. In Russian, you understand perfectly well what this text is about, because you have translated the meaning of the text and put it here, and you put it here in your first language. If your first language is stronger, if it's still kind of difficult for you to switch from one language to another, if it requires time to switch to another language or to reply in another language. And that's a problem, because once you have translated the meaning and you put it right here, what happens now, if you need to communicate the meaning of what you have just read to another person, what you're doing is that you start translating something that you put in here, which is already in Russian, into your version of English. And usually it's very far from the original, because when we start translating from English into Russian is easier, right? But when we start translating Russian thoughts, our Russian thoughts, into English, that's a lot harder. And then we start hanging on those words. What's the grammar? What's the preposition? Is the word correct? And we have all these moments where we have no idea if we have said this correctly or not. A way simpler method is to hear what a person told you. It enters your brain in English. You hear and you repeat. That's it. But I find that it's surprisingly difficult for a lot of people to repeat, because this translation mechanism is always in the way. You simply need to hear what people tell you, and then you need to repeat. And the reason why people cannot repeat, and the reason why people communicate their interpretation of what was said and not the actual message, is that they truly do not hear what a person told them. Maybe they heard half of what was said, and the other half they were like, oh, okay, I can figure it out. But they genuinely didn't hear that. Or the skill, which is also very important, short-term memory, is also not very well developed. People get it instantly, and the next second they already forgot it. Training your short-term memory is also incredibly important if you want to advance your listening skills, because the only way to become more fluent and the only way to get better at your listening skills is to learn to repeat after native speakers. And in order to repeat what they're saying, you need to remember what they have just told you. If you do not remember, you cannot repeat. So this translation mechanism is hindering the entire process, I would say. When you work with writing or reading skills, it works just the same. When you look at a piece, at the text in the English language, you need to pay attention to the word combinations that you think you know, and you even assume that you understand what they mean 100%, but you need to, most people just scan the text and they think, oh, okay, I understand the main idea. But if you really want to get fluent, you need to look at the word combinations precisely as they are. And when you communicate the meaning of the text to another person, you need to use exactly these word combinations. And again, in order to use them, you need to remember them. Most people genuinely don't remember them. So short-term memory is a crucial skill here if you're developing fluency. And attentiveness. Most people, they look at the text, but they don't pay attention to the words, because since they only pay attention to the words that they don't know. And again, it doesn't last long. They saw a new word, and oh, I don't know this word, what's this word, and they start looking it up, and this is how they linger on this word. They pay a little bit more attention to the new word. But the problem with new words is that even if you look it up, you will forget it the next day, because our brain learns by repetition. We need to come across this new word at least 20-25 times in order to remember it. So if you looked it up once, it doesn't mean you know it. It doesn't mean you remember it. This is why when we work with vocabulary, I never recommend focusing on the words that you don't know. I recommend focusing on the words that you know, you understand, you recognize them, but for whatever reason you never use them. When you speak yourself, you use different words. You look at the text and it says, it's crucial to do the reconnaissance. Again, I'm saying this word. Okay, you understand the meaning, and when you communicate to another person, you say, it's very important, we need to start. We need to investigate. What happens is that you understand the message, but when you speak yourself, you use the vocabulary that you already know. You're practicing what you already know. You're not learning anything new. You can get better if you use the vocabulary that you know, but for some reason you choose different words that are easier, the words that you have seen more frequently in your life. And this is why we choose those words, because we know the word important, we know the word beautiful, we know the word very, we know the word start. So it's easier for us to say those words again, and we're practicing what we already know, because we're translating our thoughts that are here in Russian into the easiest version of English we can resort to. But the trick is to pay attention to the words that we know, and maybe we assume that we know them, but we never use them. And it's a lot easier, trust me, it's a lot easier to focus on something you know than on trying to figure out what a bunch of new words mean. Simply pay attention, be attentive to what are other ways to say what I already know. Synonyms is another big exercise that we do, because people know the words, people know the synonyms, but for whatever reason they never use them. And everybody says that I want my English to be more beautiful. I want to, what do I say, to be free in my communication. I want to use better vocabulary. And then you put this vocabulary right in front of them, in front of their nose, and they don't notice it. They go like, yeah, but it's clear, it's easy, this text is easy. Okay, I mean, in this easy text, I see 4 to 5 word combinations that I can borrow for myself right now. I learned from every text, however easy it is. Sometimes a word that you want to borrow and introduce into your own speech might be surprisingly simple. It can be something like a person told me yesterday. I was having a session with a person, and he said, I heard the phrase at the end of the day, but I never used it myself. To me, I didn't even know that for someone this is an important phrase. But for this person, that phrase was the game changer. Like he said, well, at the end of the day, I can use it myself more. He understands perfectly what this means, but for whatever reason, usually he articulates it differently. He communicates this message in a different way. It can be something very simple, like think, for example, now, are you surprised by something? Are you surprised with something? What's the preposition? A lot of people know the word surprised, but when they start putting this word into a sentence, they don't know what preposition follows, and they put whatever preposition comes into their mind, and then they stay there, and even though they kind of continue their thought, they keep thinking, did I say the right preposition? Was it correct or not? And when you are attentive enough, you look not only on the words, and you notice not just the words, but you also notice the prepositions. You notice the words that go before the word, and you notice the words that go after the word. You learn which words can actually go together and what they mean if they're put together with different words. And this is interesting. To me, this is fascinating. As I said, I can look at a very, very simple piece of text and I can learn a lot. Something like, at the end of the day, right? or something like I took a Greyhound, right? Or it can be so as simple as unshakable optimist, right? I mean, you understand it. What is unshakable optimist? I mean, I look at it and it's clear, but I would never say it myself with my Russian speaking brain. I would never have translated it that way, and it's impossible. This is why translation and translating methods, they might help you understand the main idea, but they will never help you get to a level where you communicate with people who speak a different language since birth, and to be on the same page with them, and to catch up, and to react spontaneously and to react timely, which is the most important thing, without any delays. Therefore, just be more attentive. And it comes down to very basic skills: being attentive, and what was the other one that I said? Ditch translation methods, ditch Google Translate, and ditch all the Russian English dictionaries, use English ones. And another important thing is don't hurry to understand, because when we work with listening, for example, the first step is to hear. The second step is to understand. Because if you don't hear, you cannot understand. The problem that I see a lot, again, with non-native speakers who kind of assume that they're pretty advanced, or who have been learning a language for a long time, for many years, and they can feel kind of, okay, how much longer can it go on? Why am I stuck on the same level? I see the same pattern with all these people. When they talk to native speakers, or when they hear people talk, or when they listen to a conversation, when they listen to a piece of audio, or when they watch a video, and like any English speech, they immediately want to understand. Like they listen to, they talk to a person, and their primary goal is to understand what this person is saying to them, which is not really correct. Your first goal needs to be to hear what a person is trying to say. So if you're trying to jump over that, and instead of doing your best to hear what a person is saying, instead you're trying to understand right away. By the way, today I just had a conversation with a person here, a local one, and I'm in the US right now, and I said straight away, I go to bed straight away. And he said, that's funny, we don't say it here, but I think I know what you mean, because I understand it from the context. And he says, here in the US we say right away, but I've heard people from Europe use the word straight away. That might be British. So that was really funny. Here in the US, he says, we don't say straight away, we say right away. So don't hurry to understand what people are saying. First listen and hear. If you can hear what they're saying, you can hear if there was a piece of information that you could not hear, that was new to you, and there can be two situations. One, you cannot hear it because it's new to you and you have never heard this word before, like maybe the word reconnaissance, you cannot hear that because you've never heard it before, I don't know. Or you know this word, and you will even recognize this word in writing, but you simply are not used to hearing this word. And when people say the word that you recognize in writing, you simply don't hear it. And that happens all the time. Like, people read emails, people write emails, but if somebody reads this email to them out loud, or if somebody invites them on a conference call, they are lost, and they say, I don't understand. Even though all the words that are being said on the phone call are the words they know. So they know these words, but they do not hear them. These are the two things. So don't hurry to understand. Listen first. Hear. And only then try to respond. And first clarify if you really understood the message. It requires some time. In a public speaking course, we practice the 2-second rule, which is, first you listen to people, and first your face absorbs 2 seconds, then your face reacts 2 seconds, and only then you respond. You don't hurry to respond, because when we hurry to respond and we hurry to understand other people while skipping the step of hearing and listening to them, it only shows that we're trying to hear what we expect to hear, and we're trying to fit what a person is trying to communicate into our own expectations of what might be communicated right now. We're not ready to hear any new information. That's why we hurry, because we think we know what they will say, or because we assume that we understand everything they're saying the same second they say it. And that's not always correct. And if it was correct, then I wouldn't be seeing so many communication conflicts going on in corporations between native speakers and non-native speakers. People hurry, not even to, people think they think they hurry to understand, but in fact they hurry to make sure that other people are comfortable enough for them to communicate with them. They're trying to make other people more comfortable to talk to. And people don't really like that when you, instead of listening to them, you try to fit them in that box of your own expectations. So remember that the first step, number one, is always hear. Step number two is understand. And in between, there might be another step where you might find out that probably you don't hear everything, or probably what you hear is not what you understand. And first you need to understand what you hear, and only then you can understand the whole message that a person is communicating to you. If you practice being attentiveness, this removes the feeling of being nervous and worried when you speak in a foreign language, because many people are nervous because they're afraid of making a mistake. They might be afraid that whatever they're hearing is not going to fit their expectations, or that the other person might notice they're making mistakes, and that might affect their own reputation, business reputation, let's say. And it only comes from little practice. It comes from zero or little practice of knowing yourself. Like, if you don't know how other people perceive you and your language skills, and if you have weird expectations from yourself, like weird, unrealistic standards of how you're supposed to speak, of how fast you're supposed to understand, or how fast you're supposed to reply, then this creates tension in communication. But once you learn to be more attentive and you apply this 2-second rule, first you hear, then you understand. And when you read something, you pay attention to the way they put it, and you stop translating every single word in your head, and you stop translating the main idea into Russian. You simply try to repeat the same idea that you have just read, or you have just heard, or read or heard. Then it becomes easier, and you might notice that you will have to slow down, and you will think that you're making people wait, but that's not true. It only will seem slow to you. But this is an important step that is needed when you practice attentiveness, to slow down, because this is how you're giving yourself time to actually understand what's going on and to understand other people. Learning to think in a different language, it's all about understanding people. Your intention, well, I cannot say it has to be, but it really works when the intention is not to show that you're fluent. The intention is not to show off. The intention is not to control the situation. The intention is not to look, I'm fluent, right? The intention is to understand other people, what they truly communicate, and what they have in mind, and what they're trying to communicate between the words. That means learning a lot about their culture, and we learn about the culture through the language if we are attentive enough, because so many things are different. The intonation is different, the pronunciation is different, the articulation organs are different, your diction is different, your jaw muscles work completely differently when you speak a foreign language. People name the same things differently, and translation will not do it. Just one of you gave me a brilliant example the other day. A person moved to the US, and the first year she said she would always say close the door instead of lock the door, because close the door and lock the door mean completely different things in English. However, if you translate it into Russian, close the door and lock the door, закрой дверь. The same, right? But the meaning is different, and you're sending the wrong message if you use the wrong verb. This is why it really comes down to wanting to understand other people instead of demanding other people to understand you and your limited language skills. Even with very limited language skills, you can have great conversations with people. However, it depends on what message we're sending between the words. Are we demanding attention? And do we demand to be understood? Or are we really doing our best to hear what people are trying to communicate? And are we really trying to understand what meaning they put into the words that we assume we know? If you have any questions, just type them in the comments and I'll do my best to reply to your questions. All right then, I'll see you later.